It's time for Handicap Movers and Shakers episode 8, a series of videos where I take you through my thoughts on the revised handicap ratings which come out every Tuesday. A reminder, these ratings run from Sunday to Saturday. So if a horse is run on a Sunday, you do have a little bit longer to wait to see what revised mark you've got. Handicap Movers and Shakers has been good in recent weeks. It's provided a number of winners, so I'll endeavour to keep going and hopefully highlight a few horses that are well handicapped, and indeed a few that I think perhaps aren't so well handicapped, which might shape your thoughts going forward into the Christmas period. So starting as ever with the horses going up and going all the way back to the Sunday before last at Uttoxeter, where Roger Rarebit won handsomely at Uttoxeter over fences. I actually backed him and advised a friend of mine to back him as well. And after the first two fences, I messaged him and said, I don't fancy our chances much here. I'd be surprised if he stands up, let alone wins. His jumping was pretty scrappy early on, quite guessy, but he warmed to his task really well. Coincided perfectly with my message, actually. As further he went, better he jumped. Won with any amount in hand. He's gone up £9 to a mark of 110. He won by 6 lengths. It could have been 16. He's clearly a quirky character. He carries his head quite awkwardly, and he has failed to go through with things a couple of times previously, noticeably over hurdles, where the fences are going to sort of engage his brain a bit more and play more to his strengths. I would be fairly hopeful. He's entered again on Thursday at Market Raisin. Connor Ring takes the ride. I think it's going to take a good horse to beat him off 110, but I do think he's a horse that's perhaps going to be better under a bigger weight in a lesser grade, as opposed to going up in grade where he might not get things all his own way. One of the success stories of my last weekend, was Moriko de Vassy, who had been featured in Handicap Movers and Shakers a couple of times last year. He was a novice chaser to follow for me last year, and things just didn't pan out. But unusually, I remembered him for this season. He'd moved to Jane Williams. She does a lot of cross-country schooling with her horses, and jumping was this horse's Achilles heel over fences. Just didn't jump well at all. She's clearly done a very good job with his jumping. He jumped beautifully at Exeter, 2 mile 3 trip, travelled very well all the way through and stayed on nicely at the death to win it, I thought, quite comfortably in the end. It's up £6 to a mark of 125. On the bare face of it, for the winning margin, £6 seems heavy enough, but if you look at his very best hurdle form, he's definitely better than a 1-2-5 horse. And if this run has given him confidence, and it certainly should do, he can step on from here. The one concern would be is that David Noonan did get off him before taking him back into the paddock, and they felt he was a bit lame behind. Jane Williams in her interview didn't seem overly concerned, but if he is a bit fragile-minded, you just wouldn't want that soreness playing on his mind. Hopefully he can push on from here, because I'm sure he's a talented horse, but 1-2-5 I don't think has got to grips with him just yet. Another horse that I felt slightly went under the radar last week was Bourbali, who only won a 2-runner contest at Kempton, but it was against First Street, who's a high-class hurdler, and much of the post-race chat was on the fact that First Street, perhaps are disappointed. I think Bourbali was excellent. He clearly loves jumping. He was obviously suited by getting his own way out in front. Nico de Boinville was happy to get a lead on First Street, but Bourbali jumped from fence to fence. It's only gone up £2 to a mark of 126, and given that he was competitive off a hurdle mark of he's gone up £2 to 129. Just confirm that. Given that he's been competitive off a mark of 126 over hurdles, and given how much he loves jumping and how good at it he is, there's more fences than there are hurdles in a race. If you jump, you can take your form to another level, and I think a mark of 129 for Bourbali is underestimating his ability. It might just be that he's better in a small field race when he can sort of dominate things and get things his own way, but he's a smart horse, and make no mistake about it. Destroytheevidence was another impressive winner at Kempton on that Monday card. Good ride by David Bass. Turning in, Baddesley came alongside to challenge him, and Bass was having none of it. He kicked early and got the race won turning in, which in a week when we've seen plenty of horses perhaps finish second that should have won because jockeys have tried to be a bit cute, was a good move. Stayed on very well, did Destroytheevidence up the home straight at Kempton. It's got a £7 rise up to a mark of 129. But I would think, given the way he gallops, that actually a more galloping track, the likes of Newbury and such, would perhaps even suit this horse better. And if he does go to tracks like that, he might even come back in trip a bit on sort of winter ground. I think he's a smart prospect for Kim Bailey. He's going to surely make up into an even better chaser, provided he can organise his legs for jumping, and he is a good jumper of hurdles. But 129 for Destroy the Evidence, it might be room in that mark yet. Destroy the Evidence got a good ride. A horse that didn't get such a good ride was Famoso for Stan Shepherd, but we should counter that by saying he was very good on Roger Rarebit on the Sunday. But Famoso ran down at Taunton over 2 mile 2, looked every inch the winner all the way up the home straight, and then just didn't pick up quite as quickly as you might have expected behind a very well ridden Gary Moore winner. It was disappointing from Stan Shepherd because he has ridden this horse before, and it happened again when he won at Ludlow. He looked like he was going to win handsomely and actually made quite hard work of it. He doesn't find all that much off the bridle, and he takes quite a long time to find his finishing effort. He's gone up £3 for that, up to a mark of 89. But I think if he's given a better ride and a more decisive ride, 89 isn't going to stop Famoso in the right sort of grade, and he's still a horse I'd be interested in following. Perhaps one of the most unlucky winners or losers of, I should say, of this last week was Frero Banbou, who, for all accounts, looked like he was going to win at Newbury on his first try at 2 mile 4 this season. He did try it last year at Cheltenham and it didn't sort of work, but I think the Venetia Williams horses were under a cloud at that point. He was perhaps tiring as he came to the last fence, but I think he still had enough in the bag that he would have gone and got that race won. Got it all wrong. Fired Charlie Deutsch up into the air, gave him a whack on the backside as he came down for good measure, and lost all momentum, which meant that Can Do Kid came and picked them up and did them on the line. Frero Banbou had no response in the closing stages, but I do think he was unfortunate that he bumped into a very well handicapped horse in Can Do Kid, been knocking on the door for a while now. He's gone up £3 now for Frero Banbou to a mark of 136. I think sticking at this 2 mile 4 trip is ideal for this horse, and a mark of 136 won't stop him, given that he was very competitive off a mark of, well, he won off a mark of 134 at Lingfield last winter. This extra trip can bring about more improvement, and don't give up on Frero Banbou just yet. One of the most impressive winners of the Newbury meeting over the weekend was Ed Keeper for Sam Thomas, Sam Twiston Davis, who relished the step up in trip to 3 miles. Won very comfortably indeed. Just looks a relentless galloper. Travelled very nicely, put the race to bed between the second last and the last, and just went further and further clear. I think they're going to have a good winter with this horse. I think he'll cope with soft ground. He was second on the soft his previous start, and it wasn't the ground that beat him, it was probably the trip. So actually, over this 3 mile trip on slightly softer ground, bearing in mind the ground was good at Newbury over the weekend, I think Ed Keeper can take his form to another level again, and as such, a mark of 133 might still prove to be workable. Inch House was a short-priced winner at Newbury in the handicap chase. He's gone up £7 now to a mark of 137. He did jump very well, and he does look progressive, and I think he'll stay further. So I certainly wouldn't put a line through him, and he does play a handsome compliment to Chianti Classico, who beat him hands down at Chepstow earlier in the season. But perhaps the horse I'd be more interested in is Lord Baddesley, who finished just behind him in second. He's gone up £3 to a mark of 132, so he would have a £4 pull for just under a 2-length finishing distance. And to my eye, and I think pretty much everyone's eye, Lord Baddesley was the horse that was finishing with the wet sail. He will definitely improve for a step up in trip. I think he's well handicapped off 132. And if these two horses were to meet again on these revised terms, I think I would be siding with Chris Gordon's runner-up. And then finally, of horses getting another rise this week, yet another rise for Master Chewy, and yet another rise when he hasn't won. He's up £3 now to a mark of 140 for finishing second at Newbury to Elixir de Nuts, who was really well ridden, is clearly in a good vein of form, and Freddie Gingerly is exceptional value for his £5 claim. So I think Master Chewy's connections can count themselves slightly unlucky in that they bumped into Jello at Aintree when the fences were taken out, and that might have made a difference given how good a jumper Master Chewy is. And then they just bumped into a horse, a high-class horse that's in good form, ridden by an exceptional £5 claimer at Newbury this weekend. But Jello has also gone up now to a mark of 143. He was only 3/4 of a length ahead of Master Chewy at Aintree. And so a mark of 140 does, I think, still mean that Master Chewy is potentially well handicapped. I'd be interested to see him go up in trip. I think he's perfectly adequate at 2 miles, but everything looks to be happening just a little bit quick. He never looks quite in his comfort zone. His jumping is his main weapon. And of course, if you go up in trip, you're only going to get more fences and you're going to get more chance to use that potent weapon, which is your jumping. So I'd like to see Master Chewy up in trip to 2 mile 2, 2 mile 4. And I think if they do that, this mark of 140 is still workable. Moving on to the horses that are going down in the handicap. First off, to start with one that was flagged up on Twitter yesterday, which is Kilbeg King. Now he's down £2 for finishing third at Exeter behind Moriko de Vassy over 2 mile 3, down £2 to a mark of 135. I think he's starting to look very well handicapped, and this is starting to get the aroma of a bit of a plot from Anthony Honeyball and his team. He was an impressive winner at Punchestown off a mark of 126 and would arguably would have won off a mark of 135 then. So I think this mark is looking attractive. I'd be keen to see him out over Christmas over 2 mile 5, preferably even 3 miles. And I think if that situation comes about, Kilbeg King looks like a very likely winner in the not too distant future. Also coming down a solitary pound to a mark of 136 is the Dan Skelton trained Kateira, who ran at Kempton and tried 3 miles for the first time. I'm not sure when Harry Skelton looks back, when he's retired, that this will be a ride he looks back on with an awful lot of fondness. I think he gave her an awful lot to do and was probably trying to ride her to get the trip, and I'm never a really big fan of that sort of approach to stepping up in distance. Gave her a lot to do against a conversely very well ridden and strong stayer in Coquelicot, who was really well ridden by Rex Dingle, set his own fractions, was very positive turning in, and at no point did it ever look like Kateira was going to get back to her. But she's down to a mark of 136 now. I don't think she stayed for all that. I think she was given a poor ride, but a mark of 136, I'd be quite confident she can do some good damage off that if given a handicap entry over 2 mile 4. Captain Ord is an old favourite of mine, and he's down £2 now to a mark of 121 after his run in the Sir Peter O'Sullivan Chase, which he did win 2 years ago. But since then, his solitary win each season has come after Christmas, and I think Christian Williams is very much a trainer of habit, as most trainers are. Captain Ord is now down £6 below his last winning mark. He's been turned around quite quickly. He's had 3 or 4 runs in quite a short space of time. Be no surprise now if he were given a little bit of a break, come back in mid-January, early February, and I think Christian will find him a winning opportunity over 3 miles, possibly around the likes of Ascot, where he's got good previous form. Then in the feature race of the day on Saturday was the Coral Gold Trophy, or the Hennessy as we all know it. There are 2 here that I thought shaped with promise and have come down in the handicap. Finishing in 6th was Shakem Up'Arry for Ben Pauling and Ben Jones. He's been dropped £4 to a mark of 139. I thought he ran with a lot of panache for a long way and simply just didn't stay this trip. But he's down now to this mark of 139, and he was 3rd in the festival plate at the Cheltenham Festival behind Seddon and Fugitive off this mark. I think if Ben Pauling brings him back in trip, keeps Ben Jones on him, who seems to get on very well with him, I think Shakem Up'Arry can win a handicap this winter off this mark of 139, but around the intermediate trips. I just don't think he stays 3 miles. A horse that almost certainly stays 3 miles is Galore. He finished a place behind Shakem Up'Arry in 7th in the Coral Trophy. He's got £2 back from the handicapper and is now onto a mark of 150. Now, it's a fairly lofty mark for a handicapper, but he was going to win the Sky Bet Chase last year off this mark before capsizing at the final fence. And that sort of seemed to instigate a sort of capitulation in his form for the rest of the season. But I thought he shaped with much more promise in the Hennessy, as I'm going to call it, at Newbury at the weekend. Finished off his race pretty well, and I'm sure that there's a handicap pot in this horse this winter. Maybe 1 or 2 more runs. He might come down a little bit yet, but keep your lower in your tracker. A 3 mile handicap on a flat track, and I think he's got plenty of upside yet. Moving on to a couple of new entries, or 3 new entries, and the first is Prolific Profile for Katy Price. Now, he's a fairly low-grade horse, but he's been given an opening mark of 97, having finished 3rd at Hereford last week. I quite liked what he did here. He was outpaced down the back, but crucially for me, he never got further away from the two in front of him. He kept at it, had a lovely head carriage, just kept plugging away, never got further behind. And I'm sure if Katy Price gives him a handicap entry over 2 mile 5, maybe even 3 miles, he can definitely win off this fairly low mark. Potentially a handicap round Hereford, as he's travelled well round there on the last 2 occasions. A slightly higher calibre of horse that's got an opening mark is Wyenot, and she's won 2 hurdle races for Henry Daly. On her first start, she absolutely pulverised 2 horses rated 117 and 116. She then went up to Kelso last time and won an easier race under a penalty, but just at every point of the race you would call her the winner. She never looked in a spot of bother. She jumped with great alacrity and is a mare that I've got plenty of time for. Mark of 125 is more than workable. She's going to improve with age and with a step up in distance. I'm sure Henry Daly will mind her. She is only a 4-year-old, but if she were to pop up in a handicap off this mark of 125, she would interest me enormously. And then one that I don't know if he's well handicapped or not in truth, but he's certainly of interest, is King William Rufus. Now, if you're not aware of who he is, he's the horse that chased home the potential superstar, according to some, Jericho de Repene at Newbury. Now, that was his 3rd start. It was the best he's done over hurdles, King William Rufus, for Chris Gordon. And the handicap has given him an opening mark of 108. Now, I think this is important just to include. I mean, Jericho de Repene beat him handsomely, but it does just add some colour and a little bit of reality to quite what Jericho de Repene achieved on the face of it at Newbury at the weekend. He might well be a talented horse, and undoubtedly is, and he might well be a superstar in time, but people can get carried away, and the fact that King William Rufus, who finished just behind him, has got a mark of 108, for all that Jericho de Repene didn't come off the bridle, I think just means you should cool your jets and just wait and see what Jericho de Repene does on his next start. I think that would be far more revealing. And do put King William Rufus in your tracker. If he comes out and bolts up in a handicap off 108, that pays a good compliment to Jericho de Repene. And equally, if he's out with the washing, that would suggest that perhaps, although he was visually impressive, Jericho de Repene is not perhaps as smart as everyone is thinking. And then to finish with 2 non-movers, which I do think are interesting. North Lodge finished 3rd at Newbury behind Gin and Get Me a Tonic. Just got outpaced turning in, perhaps took a blow. It was the first start of the season, but then rallied to great effect in the closing stages. I think if you were watching the racing, you'd have struggled not to have put this in your notebook. It was a pretty obvious one. I think with the benefit of this run, a mark of 142 is still workable over this intermediate trip, or even better if Alan King was to up him in trip a little bit. He stayed very well, and I'm sure there's a pop in North Lodge. And then the final one, whose mark is unmoved, is perhaps the horse that most people talked about after the Coral Trophy, aside from the winner, and that's Monbeg Genius, who rallied well into 3rd, having got outpaced. He stays on a mark of 147. I've seen lots of chat about this horse for the Grand National. Personally, I would be a little bit cool on his chances in the Grand National. I think he just perhaps struggles to travel at a really hot pace, and we know from previous history that tactical speed in the Grand National is very important. He got outpaced at Newbury, rallied well in the closing stages, but I think that the key element to this horse is a touch softer ground. The ground was pretty quick at Newbury, which is why it suited That's Right Gino so well. So Monbeg Genius, I think off a mark of 147 on softer ground, can win a smart staying chase this winter. Something like the classic chase at Warwick would appeal to me. An extra bit of distance wouldn't do him any harm at all, but I would just be slightly cool on his chances in the Grand National, given that I think he does lack a little bit of tactical speed. So that wraps up the interesting movers and shakers. I hope I covered the ones that you sent me and messaged to me. If I've missed one off, do feel free to put a comment in this video below. As ever, please do hit a subscribe. The subscriptions are climbing nicely, so that's pleasing to see. I'm glad you're enjoying them, and I'll be back later this week.